children for the first time, thankfully, since 2010, where we provided extra payments for children under 12 and increased payments for children over 12 to recognise that children over 12 cost more money. And in addition, we restored the Christmas bonus to 100%, which I think was long overdue. And this is paid to 1.2 million long-term recipients of social welfare payments in 2018 to assist with the extra expenses that we all incur around Christmas time. Increasing the standard rates of payments, however, is only one part of the approach the Government has taken to improve the living standards of social welfare recipients. We have also introduced measures which target those most at risk of poverty, such as significantly increasing the back-to-school allowance last year, the school and clothing and footwear allowance. We extended the fuel season. We increased school funding for school meals, which is coming into its own. And we increased the disregards for lone parents, for low-income families, whilst consistently strengthening the provision for our employment services. And as part of this year's preparations for Budget 2020, I hosted my department's annual pre-budget forum in July, and representatives of some 50 groups, voluntary, trade union, business groups, had the opportunity to present their budget priorities directly to me and to my officials. And in addition, both myself and my officials, we regularly engage with a wide range of stakeholders, both bilaterally — I only had 4 meetings on Monday of this week — but also through regular meetings with people in the community and the voluntary pillar and the Social Inclusion Forum, where, amongst other relevant issues, poverty, research and issues are generally discussed. In addition, the Department's Social Inclusion Division examines the impact of any potential budget measure on poverty rates, and social impacts assessments are carried out. And this is evidence-based methodology which estimates our likely distributive effects of the changes on household income using the ESRI's switch model. So, with regard to Brexit, the Convention on Social Security was signed on the 1st of February 2019, and the parliamentary ratification processes in both Ireland and, it took a little bit longer, in the UK, were completed by March of this year. And that means no matter what happens when the UK leaves the EU, the recipients will experience no change to the reciprocal social welfare arrangements that existed and have long time existed between Ireland and the UK. The rights, the entitlements of both EU and British citizens to social welfare payments will remain for all exactly as they were before whatever kind of Brexit ends up materialising. And the discussions are ongoing at the moment in relation to this year's budget, but I think the context of the environment that we're in is going to probably push us in a direction where we will be having a slightly different and more focused budget than we would have heretofore. But those discussions are ongoing, and as probably is the norm for the Department of Social Welfare, I'd expect them to be ongoing right up to the day before the final budget is decided upon.
For a supplementary, Deputy Barry.
Minister, you didn't mention the word pensions in your reply. I want to zero in on the issue of pensions. Is it true, as we are reading in some newspapers, that the Government and Fianna Fáil, with whom they are negotiating or framing the budget, are looking at the idea of freezing the basic pension rate in this budget? Now, I understand there is a threat of a no-deal Brexit, and that would present a challenge for any government. But you could go after the rich. You could go after the big landlords. Why is it that you are choosing to target, or seeming to choose to target, the pensioners in this budget? Are they to be made the whipping boys for a no-deal Brexit? Their rents will go up, their insurance costs will go up, you will ensure that their carbon tax goes up, but it seems as though you're preparing to freeze their pensions. And I would like you to comment on that and not evade the issue as you did in your introductory comments.
Minister to respond. No, we'll take 2 supplementaries separately and then we'll combine the other 2. Minister.
Sure, thank you, Chair. I didn't evade the question because I answered exactly the question as you wrote to me, which was give you an update on the negotiations. As I've suggested to you, the only thing that I've put on the record publicly in any newspapers, and I don't know where you're reading what you're reading, is that my job is to make sure that in every budget that the limited amount of funds that I get, whether they're small or big, are targeted at the people who need them the most, and that's exactly what I'm going to do this year.
Deputy, no, you get supplementary later. Deputy Broughan.
Thanks, Cahirla. Well, Minister, I'm glad to hear you did the budget forum, and that you've been meeting all the advocacy groups. We've also all met them, I suppose. And obviously there's a gender, I agree with my colleague in relation to pensions, and in particular there's a gender pay gap or a gender pensions gap there, which you said that you might address. But I suppose we were, among the advocacy groups that particularly impressed us, were the Children's Rights Alliance, for example, the No Child 2020 campaign, and many commentators, the distinguished journalist Fintan O'Toole, for example, said we should have a children's budget. This should be irrespective. We should have a children's budget this year, because we know that a quarter of a million children, over 100,000 live in consistent poverty, but a quarter of a million live in poverty. So, we clearly need dramatic action in that regard. And also, of course, we have so many families, nearly a quarter, according to the census, headed by lone parents. We had the disgraceful changes in relation to the one-parent family payment in the previous austerity government. There's huge challenges there. So basically I'm asking you, we know there's 600 million, Minister O'Donoghue says a minimum 600 million. Now, he has found money in every single budget, and his predecessor did at times. He's found additional money behind the sofa, if you like. There's at least a 600 million there. I mean, are you fighting to get most, if not all, of that 600 million for the most vulnerable families, and particularly for our children? Thanks, Can.
Thank you, Deputy. The answer is yes, and I'm well able to do it, and I hope that the last two budgets will show you that we get relatively decent outcomes from those discussions. I love the idea of a children's budget, except children are not the only people in the country who are most vulnerable, and so we have their parents, in a lot of cases, who are lone parents. We have people living with disabilities who are some of the most affected. And whilst I'm loath to say there are an awful lot of pensioners who are living in poverty in this country. Now, there's a lot who are not, and I'm not going to chase votes here like some other people potentially might do, but my job is to make sure that I get the biggest slice of that pie to look after the people who are currently living in the most vulnerable circumstances and are at risk of poverty, but also the people who are going to be the most vulnerable in the case of a hard Brexit. And so, whilst I'm mindful of all of the knowledge that I have, I'm also very mindful that there are people out in Ireland today who potentially will lose their jobs in the next 6 to 12 months, and I have to be mindful that I have a budget for those people too.
Would you have extra money for that, Minister?
At the moment, we're being told that there isn't any extra money, and given that I don't have the ability to raise revenue in my own department, I am obviously at the mercy. But look, I'm very aware of what I need to do. I'm certainly not shy about asking for what I want, and I do value your support. So,
second supplementary.
So, on the issue of freezing the pension, the Minister says she doesn't know which paper I read. Well, I don't know, Minister, which paper you don't read, because it seems to me that every paper in the state is being briefed by Minister Donoghue and also by Michael McGrath in relation to expecting a freeze in the basic pension rate. Fianna Fáil's fingerprints are all over this one too. And I can safely say, I think, that a big majority of Fianna Fáil supporters will not support the idea of freezing basic pension rates in this budget. 10 years ago, a Fianna Fáil-led government tried to take the medical card away from the over-70s. And we all know what happened there. If I could ask Deputy O'D, I would, but I'm speaking to the Minister. In this debate, so I address my question to the Minister. Are you concerned about a similar reaction from the Grey Panthers out there to attempts to freeze the basic pension rates in this budget?
Your supplementary. We'll take the
is that what you just said?
We'll take the two together, and Deputy O'D will have no right to respond. He may wish to, but he has no. Minister. Thanks very much. Well, Minister, just continuing on children, I mean, one of the worst statistics that we were presented with in the pre-budget meetings, and I'm on the budget committee, was the almost 6,000 young people under the age of 26 who have been, on the job seekers allowance for more than a year. Obviously, the National Youth Council of Ireland, in their pre-budget submission, a fair share for young people and youth work, want you to return, to reverse and to to start moving this year to reverse the low levels of support for these young people and young people who are desperately maybe seeking for a job. But I just want to ask you in particular, we're coming very close to the end of this week, I think, to the fuel season, to the fuel allowance period beginning to start. And I just wondered, I mean, have you been consulted by Taoiseach Varadkar makes announcements in New York and so on and so forth in relation to carbon taxation? It looks like we're going to have a massive green tax increase in this budget in a couple of weeks' time. Have you been consulted about whether there's going to be a universal payment, whether it's going to be tax and dividend, or whether we're going to try and target the hypothecated tax from the green tax? Are we going to target at the most vulnerable people, in other words, and particularly those who are in fuel poverty? And we know that a very significant proportion of our people, maybe 15%, are in fuel poverty. So, like, what input have you had into that, given that it's such a huge problem?
Minister, to respond to both.
Thanks, Chair. So I'll answer both questions, if that's okay. I've never heard pensioners being called grey panthers before. I think that's a new one on me. The one thing I would like to put on the record of this House is that both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, in both our manifestos before the last general election, committed to increasing the state pension by €5 per year for the lifetime of the next government. And we have done that. It made it into the programme for government, and we have done that. And so, with respect, I'd love to see your manifesto where you made the promise and your sudden newfound interest in looking after pensioners, Deputy. The under-26s, yes, does come up at every single budget forum, and it's under consideration every single time we sit down to do our negotiations, and that's literally the best I can tell you with regard to that at the moment. And yes, absolutely, there's a number of us that have an input into how we're going to address any carbon tax gains to make sure that the people who are most vulnerable and that will be most hit will make sure that they're absorbed, I suppose, and that their life changes and practices can be eased into new practices as opposed to being hit with just financial implications that will hurt them in their pocket as opposed to anywhere else. And so, yes, we are going to do our level best. And again, my mindset is that the people that I look after have single incomes and are some of the most vulnerable people from fuel poverty perspective in the country, and I'll make sure I look after them.
Thank you, Minister. We'll move on to other